Hello, welcome back to a new YouTube video. If you're new around here, my name's Katie, I'm a full-time artist, and last year I started a daily art challenge where I draw 6 days a week, and every couple of weeks here on YouTube I do a little roundup and talk about what I've created and how I've been finding the challenge. Today we're rounding up weeks 48 and 49, and it's all sketchbook work for these couple of weeks, so I'm going to show you each piece and tell you how I found it. Day 282 is actually a very special piece, and you might have seen this in my previous daily recap when I showed you the other half of the page, because I actually created this one on day 282, and this is a very special piece because this is where Mitch and I got engaged. So whilst we were in Santorini, Mitch popped the question and I said yes, and he did it on Scaros Rock. So if you've seen my previous daily recap, you'll know that I did a few pieces inspired by Santorini as well as some plein air whilst we were there. And this one was done when we were back, but I really wanted to get it in my sketchbook and have a go at painting it and drawing it because it is such a special place. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, considering it is basically like a big brown rock, but in the middle of the caldera, so it had lovely views, like perfect blue seas around it. It was still hard to capture the rock as it is, and so I added in quite a bit of extra colours, so I've added in some pink and ochres and some greenery at the bottom, and I'm really pleased with how this turned out. It's nice and colourful. I've added on my signature lines on the ocean, and although it's not very accurate, it's a lot more elongated. It's actually a lot squatter than this. I'm really happy that it turned out well because it is such an important place to us now, and I also think it sits really nicely on this spread and next to this other one which I did whilst we were out there. Day 283 is another Santorini inspired piece, and again this was drawn when we came home and using my photos on my phone. And this is using a very limited colour palette, so I just used 3 blues, a couple of greens and this very bright magenta. And one of the things that I realised I was missing with the travel supplies that I took out there with me was I didn't take this really bright pink, and there were a lot of very bright pink flowers out there, and so that was the one sort of art supply I felt like I was missing when we went. So I really wanted to create a spread that actually used that, and I needed to do that when we were back home. And I really love the simplicity of this. It does feel very graphic, but I really like how I've shown the buildings. Because a lot of the buildings are white, I had to use light and shade to show that, and I really like the grey. I think that works really nicely. And I don't often use a lot of line work in my pieces, but I really like it in this one. I've done my usual panels, which I enjoy working in, and this one is actually the only one that had the pink flowers in. But I wanted to incorporate it more into the spread, so I added it to the corner here, and I think that works really nicely. I feel like this piece, or this spread, is the one that really captures the vibes of Santorini the most. It feels very Greek, and I was really happy with how it turned out. Day 284 is another one in my A5 talons. And this is the sketchbook I mostly use for my daily art, and I've just recorded a flip through for the first half, so if you want to watch that then I'll link that up in the cards. But this one was part of a Patreon drawing session with Emma Carlisle, so I went through the archives and watched an old one which was when they were all drawing badgers. And this is how my one turned out. I did have a couple of warm-up ones which are in my other sketchbook, but this was the main piece that I did for the daily art. And I'm really happy with it. It's the first time I've drawn a badger, and I'm not sure I really captured him very well, but I do really like the background, and I think he stands out really nicely because he is so black and white, and I love the warm tones around it. I think that works nicely. Like I said, I'm really happy with the contrast and the warmth that comes through from the woodlands. It's obviously not like the most finished piece because it was still done under a timer, but I really love that it's full page, that goes edge to edge, and although the scale's a bit off, I get a really nice feeling from this one. If you've been following for a while, you know I do virtual road trips on my Instagram stories, and I create polls and different options for my audience to vote on, and then I draw whatever wins. And we've been doing a Switzerland road trip for the past few weeks, And so for day 185, we visited the Furka Pass and then Interlaken. So the Furka Pass is obviously a very famous place and I'm really happy with how I captured it. I think this is probably one of my most favourite pieces from the Swiss Road Trip Challenge. And we do this virtually, so it's all through Google Maps and I find the piece beforehand and then I put the poll options on my stories. And this one I was quite nervous about. I wasn't sure how it would turn out because it's just like a road within the mountains and it's a really grand view, so I wasn't sure how I could interpret that and get it into such a small scale because this is in my 12x12 little Royal Challenge sketchbook. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. This one is definitely my favourite and I really love the pops of purple in the foreground. And then we visited Interlaken and went to this gorgeous lake. And this one feels very empty. I was quite disappointed with how I captured this one, but I guess because the one on the left was so busy, it kind of worked to have a more peaceful and simpler piece on the right. And I always find with these spreads that there's one that I like more than the other, and I haven't really done two that I love together. So maybe that's just the way this road trip goes. But again, I really enjoy the interactivity on my stories, and I like the spread as a whole. Day 286 was a very quick 20 minutes in my A5 sketchbook and I painted these fish. So this was referenced from a new book that I got for my birthday and I didn't spend very long on these. Like I said, I just set a 20-minute timer and I used gouache at first and then I went in and defined all the colours and all the details with Neocolor pastels. I didn't think much of this, but it was quite popular on Instagram and Twitter. And I find that my quicker pieces usually are, and I have done a similar spread before, which you'll have seen in my sketchbook tour, and that was popular too. So I'm not really sure what it is about fish, but I was really pleased with these. I find setting time is really helpful for the daily art challenge when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and just need to do it. And that was what happened here. I found 3 fish that were in one of the reference books and I'll put all the references down below if you're interested. And I'm really happy with this guy's expression and I do like the colours. But like I said, it's just a very quick one and very rough, so I don't think it was finished to a very high standard, so I really was surprised by how popular it was. But it's a nice way to fill my sketchbook and also nice to draw something a bit different. For day 287, I was again doing a Patreon drawing session with Emma Carlisle, and I was rewatching a Lighthouse session. So I actually did 2 spreads. I did this one, which was my warm-up, so these were all done in 5 minutes. So each panel was 5 minutes, and I'm really happy with this. I think having the timer really makes me work with more energy, and I think that comes through on these. And I really like the colours. And then the second spread I did were these 2 panels, which were 15 minutes each. So you can see they're a lot more defined, a lot less rushed, and they also feel quite calm compared to the others, which definitely have that chaotic energy, and that obviously comes from having such a limited timer. At first I thought these were too messy, and I wasn't sure which spread was my favourite, but I am leaning towards this one now, despite not liking them at first. Sometimes having that distance on your art really helps you see it in a different light. So if you do hate something, then I always recommend looking at it the next day. Also being quite objective about what you do like instead of writing it off completely. So on these ones I really like the colours, and on these ones I really like the atmosphere. So I'm really happy with this one on the left. I really like this green cliff here, but I also like this sky more on this one, whereas this one feels a bit empty, and especially in contrast to the others, which have very interesting skies because they're at sunset, I think the contrast is bigger. So I'd love to know which spread you preferred. I think most people preferred this one on the Instagram post, but I did have a couple who liked these ones. So to kick off week 49 and day 288, I actually really wasn't feeling very motivated or inspired. And when that happens, especially with the daily art challenge, I try and limit my options. So for this one, I did it again in my little 12x12 sketchbook because it feels like a really manageable size, and I also set myself a 5-minute timer again. It does mean that the result is sometimes really messy, but not every piece of the daily art challenge has to be perfect or very grand, and just the act of being creative and creating something in my sketchbook is the point of the challenge. So this is the spread that I made for day 288. Like I said, these were done on a 5-minute timer, and these were referenced again from photos from our trip to Santorini. When we were having breakfast at a cafe one day, I was really taken by this little pickup truck and the view behind, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Considering it was so quick, I think I did capture the pickup truck quite well, especially as I don't draw cars that often. And then this other one is probably my favourite of the two, and on both of these you can tell that it's the exact same colour palette and I like the way they sit together. One of the things I enjoy most is adding in all the little details, so I love these like telegraph lines and the lines overhead, and I really like the texture I've added on the ground as well. So this really was a quick spread for the daily art challenge. It just took me 10 minutes out of my day, so if you are starting a daily art challenge or are in one, remember that you don't have to spend long if you don't want to, and inspiration really does ebb and flow, so if you have ways to make it easier for yourself on harder days, then definitely go for it. I actually only have a few weeks left of my daily art challenge for 1 whole year, and I'm going to be recording a video for that, so keep your eye out in August if you want to start one, because I'll be sharing like a roundup of how I found it and some of my tips and tricks if you're starting one for yourself. Day 289 is back in my A5 sketchbook, and I was feeling much more inspired this day because it had been my birthday at the weekend and I was lucky enough to receive some new art materials. So sometimes inspiration can come from seeing an image you really want to draw, sometimes it can come from wanting to try some new materials. So for this spread, I created this drawing of Cornwall. So this is in Megavissey, which is a Cornish harbour, and you can see how vibrant it is, and that's because I used some acrylic inks. So I have used acrylic ink before. I had one colour which was phthalo green, but I got the primary set for my birthday and I was really excited to use them because I could mix them, whereas before I just had the one bottle. So like I said, this was the primary set, and so I mixed all of the colours that you see here with the colours I got and the phthalo green, and all these greens were mixed with the yellow and the blue. The only thing I didn't use with the acrylic inks is the sky, because I wanted it to be a really different tone to the sea. I wanted it to be a much warmer blue, and I also wanted to use white in it, and I didn't find the white ink worked, so I just used gouache for that. I'm so happy with how this turned out. I really love the vibrancy. It made me feel really good and excited about my artwork. I added on all the details on the boats and the houses with coloured pencils. And I don't think I used Neocolours on this one at all, so it's all coloured pencils, acrylic ink and gouache for the sky. I enjoyed doing this so much I created an original painting which is now sold on my Etsy shop, but it just goes to show that it really ignited that inspiration and that spark to create again, which I was really happy with, and I'm just so happy with the vibrancy and colours in this spread. Day 290, I was in my large A4 Royal Talent sketchbook, and I filled this spread up with a lot of fungi. And again, this was referenced from my new reference book, which is the Natural History book, and again I'll pop that down below in the description. But I was really taken by the colours of all these different fungi, and I really wanted to put them into my sketchbook in one big spread. So I don't sketch beforehand, I use the paint to sketch and find the shapes of the mushrooms first, and then I added on all the details and defined the shape a bit more with Neocolours and coloured pencils. I actually used some new gouache for this spread, which was Royal Talent's own gouache, and I was really impressed with the pigmency, and it wasn't super chalky, so definitely a good budget brand if you want to try gouache for yourself. I'm really happy with this spread. I think it works really nicely. I think it would make a really nice print if I rearranged some of the mushrooms and maybe made it into like an A4 or an A3 poster. I think that would look really nice, but I'm happy with how this turned out. I remember I actually drew this on quite a hot day, so some of the Latin names aren't correct and I spelled those wrong. I've done this sort of spread before where I fill it with lots of different things of the same thing, and I always enjoy doing those. It's nice to use a lot of colours and focus on one subject but in different ways. And I also learned a lot about mushrooms and fungi in the process. Day 291, I was back in my A5 sketchbook and creating panels again. So once again I used MapCrunch to find these views. That's a random Google Maps generator that I've used a lot over the year of my daily art challenge. And this time it took me to Estonia, which I hadn't drawn before. This was created with gouache and coloured pencils, so again I didn't use Neocolours for this one, and I'm really pleased with it. I think it worked out really nicely, and the colour palette means that it feels quite warm. You can see with all my little colour swatches here that I didn't limit my colours and I used quite a lot, but I really love the effect. I think the gouache base layer really softens the whole thing, and I really love how everything's linked because it is obviously the same place. MapCrunch took me to this one location, and then you can swivel the camera where I got, I think, 3 of these views, and then I moved a bit further down the road and got some of the others. And this was quite a quick spread. I always find the panel ones generally are. Gouache is a very quick way to put down a lot of colour, and I'm just really pleased with the end result. I think it was a really nice one for the Daily Art Challenge, and I always recommend checking out MapCrunch if you're stuck on what to draw. Day 291 was day 6 of our Swiss road trip, so following on from the previous week, this time we went and visited Ticino. And again, I learned so much about this place when I was researching and finding all the different views and creating the polls for my Instagram stories. So this is very South Switzerland and it borders Italy, so it's got very Mediterranean inspired architecture, and the main language there is actually Italian. So you can see that it doesn't look very Swiss, but it was a really interesting place and I really loved the bright colours. Obviously, doing a project like this and going around Switzerland via Google Maps, there's a lot of the same architecture and the same sort of views, so it's really nice to draw something different and really use some of the brighter colours. So this on the left is along the promenade, and there's some very colourful buildings and lots of cafes along here. And then on the right we went to a lake, and it had this lovely orange house, and I really like the way it links together because we've got the bright buildings here on the left and the bright building on the right. So I do feel like they link, which is really nice as one spread, especially because they are different areas. Again, this does have a softness to it. This is definitely in the style that I've been doing this Swiss road trip in. I've done my usual gouache layer first and then gone in with some coloured pencils and a tiny bit of Neocolour. And it's not my favourite spread, but I do like the colours. I think this one is my favourite of the two, but they do feel closer in terms of me liking one and not the other for this spread. Again, I've done my usual texture on the sea, and because of all the details on the buildings, it definitely took longer than some of the other spreads, but I do like how it's cohesive, and that was another day ticked off on our virtual road trip. So to end week 49, day 293 was in my A5 sketchbook and I was painting frogs. So again, I was using my new favourite reference book. It was definitely a very, very good present from Mitch, and I've been using it constantly to draw. And I created these using gouache. Again, I didn't sketch first, I just used my paintbrush to lay down the colours, and then I went in again with Neocolours for the patterns and some coloured pencils, as well as using a white gel pen, which I don't usually use, just to highlight some of the lighting on their backs. So this was actually practice for a Patreon drawing session I did with my patrons that evening, and this is a new thing that we're doing on Patreon every other month, where we do a Zoom drawing session and we draw the references that I've curated. So this month it was frogs, and in a couple of months it will be something completely different. And it was really lovely to do something so interactive and actually have my patrons draw with me. On the alternative months we do a live stream where it's just the camera down looking at my sketchbook and I create live on YouTube. So it was nice to do something different, and I'm really looking forward to the next one because it was a lot of fun. So I'm really happy with this spread. It's a lot of colour, and like I said, I really do enjoy filling up my sketchbook with one subject like this and showing all the different colours. I did find some of their body shapes and like doing their toes and their eyes really tricky, but because there are so many different types of frogs, I could easily fill another spread and practice again with totally different ones. But I was really happy with how these turned out, and for these I did use my acrylic inks again, which I think is where the vibrancy comes from. So that's the end of the week 48 and 49 roundup of the daily art. At the end of these videos I always share my favourites and I ask you for yours. But I have to say mine would probably be this big fungi spread. I'm really pleased with it and I love all the colours. But I'd love to know which one was your favourite out of these 2 weeks down below. We are coming to the end of the daily art challenge, so there will only be a couple more videos like this on my channel. But if you want to see the playlist for all of the previous weeks, then I will also link that down in the description box. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel and my artwork. I really appreciate it. And you can find me creating daily over on Instagram, or I'll be back here on YouTube to do another recap in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week with a new video. See you later.